định là như thế.
Ladies and gentlemen, this been working? Okay. It's my pleasure and duty to welcome you to the University of Auckland and to the 14th annual workshop of the Geothermal Institute. It's a particular pleasure on behalf of the university to welcome here people from overseas, and I know there are people from many parts of the world. It's a particular pleasure to welcome back some of our earliest students, and I'd like to just single out one of them, James Caniua, who was on the first course, who's come back here from Kenya. And James, it's a delight to have you with us. I can't see James, but he's there. I should also note that one of the organisers of this workshop is Casey Lee, who was also a class member of James at that time. And we've been running long enough that we've now started to recycle former students through the system. But it's an enormous pleasure. It's an enormous pleasure to welcome, to look around the hall and to see so many old friends, and to recognise that the geothermal business really is one of the great clubs of the world. And I know from the way in which Derek Priest and Manfred Hoxton, travel, that they have friends everywhere. And it's such a delight to see friends from overseas here and friends from around the country, old and new. I'd like also to make special mention of the fact that I think this is the first workshop at which we've had official Maori representatives. We have representatives here from the Ministry of Maori Development, and we have a representative from the Tuaropaki Maori Trust. And I'd like to just recognise those people and to say how pleased and how welcome you are to this workshop. And I know that you, like the rest of us, appreciate how important geothermal resources are to New Zealand and many other countries. It is, I think, a remarkable achievement that this institute, which was started with the enthusiasm of Manfred Hoxton, and you trained me before I leave the shop, and Nick Brothers, the late Nick Brothers, and Jim Hurley, Healy and a number of others that we got going with enormous support from UNDP and from the Ministry of External Relations and Trade. It was called the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in those days. But the support, the enthusiasm from within the community at large here, its industry, government, and university circles, the support that we got from the New Zealand government through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and from the representatives we had at UNDP in New York, and the enthusiasm that the people at UNDP displayed for this development. It's a remarkable achievement that it's gone on and grown and continues to grow throughout the years. The fact that each year we can, from this very modest base, run increasingly successful workshops, I think is a great tribute to all those people involved with the Institute and with the industry. And because of the extent to which we rely upon the Ministry of External Relations and Trade and their support, it's a particular pleasure for me to welcome here today Richard Wood, who is the Director of the Development Division of the Ministry. That division is responsible for administering the official development aid program. And if some of you don't recognize Richard's name, I can perhaps remind you that he was our ambassador in Iran at a particularly difficult time in the history of that country. It's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Mr. Richard Wood and ask him to open the comments. Thank you.
Professor Meyer, Professor Hochstein, ladies and gentlemen. Well, first I must convey the apologies of John Bennett, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of External Relations and Trade, who had accepted the invitation to come today to open. Unfortunately, politics being what they are, he is detained in Wellington. There is a special meeting of Cabinet today, which was not originally foreseen, and that's why he's not here. So I do convey his personal apologies. At the same time, I'm very glad because it's given me the chance to come, and having had involvement, personal involvement on and off over the last 12 or more years with the geothermal elements of our official development systems program and with the activities of the Institute, I'm very happy to be given the chance to come and be here on this occasion. I'm also glad because although I've visited Auckland University a few times, I've never actually spoken in Auckland University. I've given several lectures in my own alma mater, Canterbury University, but there I've been talking on subjects I feel more or less confident about, like the Middle East and the Gulf War. So I'm glad I haven't been asked actually to give a lecture on geothermal energy, because I didn't stump it. You're going to get, though, many good papers on that subject, as I can see from the program. The Geothermal Workshop is an important event in the calendar of the Institute. It gives an opportunity for participants to share information on the latest development. For the Institute, and indeed for the Official Development Assistance Program, it marks the conclusion of another successful diploma year, and the 1992 Geothermal Reservoir Engineering course is also finished. As you all know, the development of geothermal energy in New Zealand, especially the exploitation of the Wairaki field, resulted in New Zealand acquiring knowledge and skills in this area. And in the late 1960s, it was recognized that this technology could be applicable in other parts of the world, including in developing countries. And as a result, New Zealand gradually became involved in the development of geothermal energy, initially in Indonesia and the Philippines, and later in some other countries. The Kamojang geothermal project in Indonesia is still the single biggest project that we have funded under the New Zealand Official Development Assistance Program. It spanned over 20 years with expenditure in excess of $37 million. That is big money by New Zealand ODA standards. The New Zealand project cruised the field and built a 30 megawatt power station. This has subsequently been extended by the construction of a 110 megawatt extension funded by the World Bank. Both the original project and the extension were designed and supervised by Geothermal, a New Zealand company. My own first involvement with geothermal development overseas was in that context, and I enjoyed visiting Kamojang in 1981 and seeing the work that was being done. Currently, the aid program in Indonesia is focusing on the development of small-scale geothermal power projects as part of the rural electrification program. We're at the drilling stage of a 4 to 10 megawatt project at Colombo on Flores Island, and we're shortly to investigate a further project of the order of 10 megawatts, possibly at Ende in Florida. KRTA, another New Zealand company, undertook the feasibility study for Colombo, and Gensel were engaged to manage the project. The consultancies for the next project will again be decided by tender. It's all very open and competitive. In the Philippines, geothermal energy assistance formed the basis of our bilateral program from 1972 to 1985. During that period, over $20 million was spent from the New Zealand ODA program in helping the Philippines to develop its substantial geothermal resources. And I also had the pleasure of visiting the field at Tongona during, in fact, the same journey in 1981. In the period 1972 to 80, the focus of the program in the Philippines was on exploration and scientific assistance and on the provision of training for Filipino personnel. KRTA played an integral role in this study. In the period 1980 to 85, the focus of the program shifted more and more towards the provision of training. Between 1972 and 1985, 60 Filipino scientists were trained here at this institute. Though the New Zealand aid program is no longer involved with geothermal development in the Philippines on a large scale, some links still exist. We continue to train Filipino scientists here. We also cooperate with the Environmental Management Division of the Philippines National Oil Company in the protection of geothermal watershed reservations by way of an agroforestry project. An important aspect of all ODA-funded geothermal projects has been to ensure that the partner countries acquire the expertise to keep completed projects running and to enable them to play an important technical role in future projects. The aim has been to transfer the technology as much as possible. A significant part of this technology transfer has been undertaken in the field by New Zealand firms. For instance, at Kamojang, 90% of the engineering staff initially came from New Zealand, but this was reduced to 35% during the construction. New Zealand firms gradually concentrated on the most specialised functions and also moved to new areas in other countries. By the late 1970s, it had become apparent that on-site technology transfer and short-term training attachments in New Zealand were inadequate for the full transfer of technology. Formal education in the geothermal sector was required. In 1978, as Professor Meyer recalled, this university, UNDP, and we, as we were then called, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, agreed to establish and fund the Geothermal Institute. Since 1990, funding of developing country students here has been largely the responsibility of my MERC, through the ODA program. We now fund 20 diploma students a year. We support short courses such as the Geothermal Reservoir Engineering course, and we fund graduate students both through ODA bilateral awards and through the postgraduate tuition fee scholarships which are administered by the university. As you may know, the existing arrangement under which support is given to the Institute is scheduled to expire at the end of 1993, the end of next year. My staff are currently reviewing the arrangement with a view to making recommendations on future ODA support for training at the Institute. Their recommendations will be considered by management before a final decision is reached. That process is not yet finished, but we hope to be in a position to announce our decisions by the end of this year. What has become clear from the review so far, I'm told, is that training at the Institute has been very successful. High standards have been maintained. 95% of the 322 developing country students who have undertaken the diploma course have returned to their own countries. That is a very high percentage by normal ODA training standards. A majority of those are still involved in geothermal energy. Others have moved into allied fields. In several countries, critically important geothermal energy activities are led by engineers and earth scientists trained at the Institute. Since its inception, the Institute has trained more than 400 students from about 30 countries from all parts of the world. And from our point of view, one welcome benefit of that is that links with New Zealand and those countries have been fostered. And the number of people here today from a great selection of those countries bears witness to that. The Institute also provides a centre of excellence, which is a vital component of the New Zealand geothermal industry. That industry enables New Zealand to continue to make significant contributions to geothermal energy development around the world. The leading role of New Zealand in the geothermal sector is evident by the ability of New Zealand firms to compete internationally with firms from other countries. The available evidence suggests that the economic and environmental characteristics of geothermal energy will make it an attractive option in many countries over the next decade or two. This will in turn lead to a continuing demand for specialist training for engineers and earth scientists. Some of that training will occur in developed countries, including some at the Institute here, which is recognized as a world leader. But it is inevitable that changes in the training for geothermal energy will occur. The development of in-country formal training will be an important issue over the next few years. Staff of the Institute are working with us in assessing professional manpower requirements and designing a training program for Indonesia. This is an exciting new phase in a process of technology transfer which began more than 20 years ago. This workshop will demonstrate yet again the leading role played by the Geothermal Institute. That research is the basis for the high quality education it provides, and I'm therefore very happy to have this chance to be with you today, and I look forward to hearing some of the proceedings.
Perceptive. I'm going to crave your indulgence, both the audience and Agnes, to give you a little more of Agnes's background. Agnes has a master's qualifications in botany from the University of the Philippines, and she holds the record for the youngest PNOC employee to be appointed to a managerial position. And I believe Agnes still holds that record. Agnes looks after a department of more than 150 personnel spread over Manila, 4 development and operating geothermal sites, and exploration sites too numerous to mention. The 2 principal divisions of Environmental Management Division are the Watershed Management and Protection Division and the Project Environmental Monitoring. Agnes's responsibilities cover all of PNOC's energy sectors, with particular reference to geothermal, coal, and previously the fuel alcohol program. These responsibilities cover the preparation of all EIAs, all resource permitting, the PNOC, as well as all environmental clearance certification. The Philippine National Oil Company, under Agnes's guidance and control, has undertaken pioneering work in the area of social forestry, establishing self-sustaining cooperatives within the PNOC reservations. And these are programs that are used as models for implementation both within the Philippines and elsewhere. And these include the agroforestry projects mentioned by Richard Woods. They cover hundreds of thousands of hectares and are extensive beyond what many people could imagine was possible in the Philippines. Since her arrival, Agnes was official delegate to the Brazil Earth Summit Conference from the Philippines, and I would think there was probably no single person who has contributed more to both the development and the implementation of Philippines environmental legislation. Since her arrival in New Zealand, Agnes has visited the NAFA geothermal site and sees a number of similarities between NAFA and Mount Apo in the Philippines. The story of Mount Apo is yet to be told, and when we do learn about it, I believe it will be fascinating reading of the development of the project against enormous opposition from all sorts of diverse and sometimes quite unlikely sectors. Having said all this, and indeed there is much more to be said, perhaps we can see why Agnes has won the PNOC Model Employee of the Year for 5 years. In Agnes' spare time, she's a wife of one of the Philippines' leading Landsat and remote sensing scientists, and Agnes and Ben have 2 children. The title of Agnes' address this morning is Environmental Management of the Philippine Geothermal Development, and I'd like you to welcome Agnes to Hazel.
Director Woods, Dr. Hochstein, Professor Mayor and Professor Kingston, distinguished faculty and students of the Geothermal Institute, fellow workers in the geothermal industry, good morning. It is my great pleasure today to share with you our country's experience in the environmental management of our geothermal development projects, and we hope that we can assist you in your future undertakings in the field. Environmental protection has been an important issue in the Philippines, especially in the last 5 years. And the Philippines, along with 178 countries that signed the Earth Summit document last June, recognize the continuing deterioration of our common environment, which man's well-being depends. In the Philippines, environmental degradation is further aggravated by our high population, which at the moment is 50 million, and stagnant economic growth. And to solve the country's economic problem, there is at present an urgent need by government to produce more energy sources, but at the same time a balanced approach to the economic growth and environmental issues is needed for a sustainable form of that development. Among the energy options available to the Philippines that falls squarely within the context of sustainable development is geothermal. And the country, convinced that geothermal is relatively environmentally clean and to a certain extent renewable, is now embarking on an accelerated geothermal development program. We're targeting around 2,000 megawatts by the year 2000, and hand in hand with our accelerated geothermal development program is a vigorous environmental management effort. PNOC's Energy Development Corporation Environmental Management Program has been formalized in 1978. It is a proof of our company's early recognition of the importance of this environmental mission, and we consider it a primary business function in the company. You will be pleased to note, as has been said by Tim here, that we in the environmental group of PNOC has been trained in New Zealand 10 years ago, and we continue to be partners of the New Zealand government in our social forestry projects. Our company has the following major environmental and technical trusts. Our main task is the conversion of geothermal resource into energy for the support of our country's economy. But hand in hand, we have three more tasks, which includes environmental management, or the compliance of all the PNOC energy projects to establish environmental regulations and standards. We also manage 265,000 hectares of watershed reservation, and we do protection, development, rehabilitation of these reserves to sustain the water-based geothermal power plants. Also, by 1987, our company installed a community relations policy that recognizes our social responsibility in the community where we operate, and we provide assistance in the field of education, health, livelihood, and infrastructure. At the moment, in the Environmental Management Division, we are around 183 personnel. Let us never lose sight of our primary responsibility, and that is the health and public welfare in the area where we operate. And we hope that we have imparted to you some information that will be useful in the future in your personal undertakings in your own country. Thank you and good day.
Ladies and gentlemen, a tour de force. I think probably many of us have no idea of the extent of integration, vertical integration, the range of environmental management services that are being undertaken. We think of environmental management as far as geothermal resources go, stopping well short of the level that the Philippine National Oil Company takes it. I let Agnes go on a little just because it was, I think, captivating stuff. If there are any questions, let's have them. And I was going to say you've stunned them to silence, Agnes, but there is somebody. Yes.
His purpose was how the local people responded to the
I think all sectors now are very excited about geothermal. Not only the government, but the community scientists is already realizing the importance of geothermal, not only because they look at geothermal as environmentally benign, if properly managed, but more importantly because of the local benefits that go to them, which is not available in other energy options. So it's now a critical component of the country's energy program. It seems that every sector is now cooperating, and those that have still questions, we continue to dialogue with them.
Yes.
How do you balance intrinsic values of ecosystems and biodiversity and so on? You think of cultures that live and is eventually 40% of royalties are going back to the community, so they are more in favor of development in certain areas?
We are, I'd like to answer that in three dimensions. As to the 40% that goes back to the community, they are accepting the project not because of the financial remuneration, but because, one, the 40% is managed by a multi-sector group, which is represented by the religious sector, the community, the environmental organizations, and the developer, so that they can actually convert that 40% into environmental programs and grasp.
Kailua volcano has erupted several times in the last 18,000 years, producing widespread airfall pumice and near-vent lava domes and the whole thing occurred with eruption started in about 2020. We are now area. We're just in here behind the southern crater. We're going to walk down past southern crater, there's an echo crater, Inferno, come back out, skirting around Black road here, and then the lower roof crater, just close to Warburg Terrace. fractures. Same here on the mountain, craters around the lake, on the mountain, and they're all left stepping fractures. So this crater is here, orientation sort of out this way. That's where the next crater is, like 1886, 10th of June. No evidence for magmatic material having made its way to the surface from this particular crater. Today it has a lake in the floor of it. It's cold in the region. There is a borehole at Tiru, which water levels, within reason, is the same as the water level of this lake, so we're pretty confident of that. The other feature of this crater is you'll notice that it's very, very steep wall, and there's no coarse ejecta around its margins. Unfortunately, the outcrop is not very good. You see on the far side of the crater, you can see the brown coloured Holocene ashes, airfall ashes, overlying the 50,000-year-old legend. And the interpretation of that is it's actually a flat crater. But the actual vent itself is probably something very, very much smaller. Down in the centre there, maybe only 10, 20 metres across or something. At the end of the eruption, the cavity that was formed by the has collapsed. They were retreated. A gully like this on the dike that was intruded into the area, and you have the fine grained muds from the geothermal system when it was fragmented by the explosions generated by the intrusion of the dike. The dike would have caused the geothermal system to become unstable and that can just blow itself to bits. The other craters we were visiting,
So if we can just swing your attention around this way first, we'll look at what we're taking. Behind us here, in front of us now, we have an outcrop all the way along this road bank, the same outcrop. This is ejecta from the 1917 hydrothermal eruption, which originated from the crater floor down behind us. As I mentioned before, we have a large range of grain size. We have large different history class, the flow or airfall deposit. You find the sub-rounded pumice fragments in contact with each other and into the spaces in between them. Some of the pyrophasic flows do have a matrix deposit and underside with variation. Hydrothermal eruption deposits are always of this style. Have you looked at the Indorotakawa?
Yep.
You have, yeah.
Yep, that's him, but
Seen the same points in the last few days.
they should be telling you all about it. They know all about it.
Eh?
They should be telling you all about it.
Right.
They know all about it.
The hydrothermal oldest class just through this crater. There's only one outcrop that's just across the other side of the crater rim there, actually on the forestry boundary road, where there's several metres of the basaltic deposit. It's really the only outcrop we can find. It's within 100 metres of the edge of the crater. It can't have come from very far away as opposed to that quick. But we don't find around here, mainly because it's at quite some depth below the 1917 deposit, 1886 deposit. We haven't seen the basalt on this side of the crater. In the far background, you see some steam rising out of another crater in the wall there. There's a very small rhyolite dome there in Mount Hazard. At the north end of the crater in 1900, the geyser started erupting. It's named Waimangu Geyser. It has recorded eruption heights in the order of 400 metres. It cycle or a return period of about 36 hours. Sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, but average about 36 hours. The geyser erupted from 1900 through to 1904. Mid 1904, the geyser became intermittent and actually stopped for a couple of months and started erupting very strong. By the end of 1904, it ceased erupting. We'll visit the basin, which is the source of the geyser, in a few minutes. So after 1904, we had this flying, what we call flying pan flat, a large flat surface, a few springs around the large That was 1912, there was a small outbreak. 19...
What's that? Foam. Something like foam.
Foam, yeah, it's a part of the life cycle of a diatom.
Uh-huh.
A little microscopic
Yeah.
organism.
There is dissolved.
I'm not sure, unfortunately, exactly how, but it's to do with them.
We don't want to put another yacht.
Yeah.
others are at the moment. This morning we heard that there's oodles of geothermal energy out there. It sounded to me as if there was enough for everyone. I'm just wondering if Brian has any views on who should have access to geothermal energy and what criteria should be used for that access. ECNZ is an existing geothermal user, whether that would be subject to the same rules.
I think the question in terms of need, my comment was in terms of relative need, that at the moment, if you heard the chart I put up, that new generation is going in at the moment, new generation is going in each year, but it's a lot cheaper than most of the major geothermal developments that are coming down. And in my view, the major geothermal developments, and it's not all of them, because as they have plenty of demonstrated that they are able to put them in at the moment, or as a couple of Troy. And I believe that probably there are a number of others that could go in at this time. But generally, I believe that there are, when you look at the opportunities that we have, all of us, that I don't personally believe there's going to be a lot of major geothermals until the later part of this decade, which is not that far off, but I think in the meantime things have become a lot easier. The access to the resource, we heard the paper this morning I'm referring to the Resource Management Act and the actual ownership on the resource. The interpretation that this goes with the land and in terms of common understanding. But the question that relates to the resource itself, which is of course subject to the treaty claim, is very uncertain. And at the moment the Crown says it's own resource, and there are people that claim that and says no, that's not true. So as a developer, we're interested to find out who actually does own that resource. The access to the resource, though, we have got multiple landowners and multiple people who have access to the resource. I think that we have to separate resource ownership, or not just ownership, development from resource utilisation, so that the two don't be hanging together. I think that's part of the big problem at the moment, is that the two are too much tangled, and we hope that soon that a mechanism could be found that would allow the resource to be developed in an orderly fashion, so that then those who should do generation can do so. That's quite a separate issue.
Thanks, Brian.
Same line again, so first of all, I think you will be very, very interesting speakers and projecting something which a lot of us here that would be very interesting to hear. I get very concerned with the fact that New Zealand don't have any national energy policy, and therefore there is no direction as to what resource we use. We already do it, New Zealand has a surplus of energy resources, but how best to use this, I think, in a very complex manner. I wonder if any of you would like to comment, perhaps Doug, in terms of the electricity authority, whether you see this as a disadvantage to New Zealand not having a national energy policy.
Well, my view is that we've all grown up with energy policies that have been very much hands-on and controlled from the centre. And at least my view would be that we do have an energy policy right now. It's just that people are not familiar with it being in the shape it is. That is, trying to ensure that the right pricing information is available in a commercial sense, so that people in the market make the right decisions. So it's trying to move away from a very controlled environment where someone says, we were only going to use that energy in that place. It's one where trying to ascribe the right value to the various energy resources. And we are sort of caught a wee bit in the middle because we've got all this historic baggage. The fact that Maui gas is very cheaply priced, which means that it's not always used in the best places, or more often than not used in the right places. So sale is correct for those things. And I would say that if you get the right framework for those direct costs associated and values associated with those resources, you can apply other external things like environmental on top of that. You actually move, if we as a country move more quickly than we damn well have to that, you'd have much more sensible decision making going on. So we're caught a little bit in the middle. The policy is to get to that goal, but we're a long way away from it.
I totally agree with you. I think it is the fact that we don't have it. It's not certainly the general market.
Can I add that? With the assistance of ORMAC, I've done a study on interpretive legislation in the United States. And that legislation was enacted as a result of the energy shortage in the late 1970s. And the competition my company now faces against Brian's written off hydros and generating at 0 cents per kilowatt hour or 1 cent or something, and Clyde at 12 or 13 cents, and Huntley at 7 or 8, and Kentucky at 6.5. If the US legislation was in place in this country and had an energy plan that they're talking about, and renewable resource generators got paid for priority, as they do in the States, you'd see some real development. Now, we're having to compete with the written off hydros. They're historical accidents. They're there. Thank God we paid for them. I don't want to sell them. So I believe that the government, in fact, should not be saying equal. It should be encouraging participation from new developers, like Sam and I, and Brian and I, but that price should be on the current cost of development. You couldn't build out Haki for the cost we're having to produce our project for. And I shouldn't have to go without dividends for 14 or 15 years to be collected for. And that's the reality of what's happening. So saying I've answered the question another way around and saying I think the government could help here if they were strong.
Well, I'm sure you're going to get some comments, but if you put the price of externalities over in the United States and coal, you never produce electricity and coal in this country.
Perhaps from another perspective, and I just think it's you people have got to tell the government what you want. They can have a national policy. They've got the ability in this act to determine almost how we deal with it. But what's coming forward, the national coastal policy is the first thing we see. Now, what do you want? Do you want this thing to go up here when you in the dark, or do you want to be able to go to the beach and catch a snapper? That's really what matters. So I think the pressure has come on politicians to produce a national coastal policy when, to my way of thinking, a national energy policy should be one of the first things where you get a national coalition for us to respond to. But by the same token, we are ourselves going to work on a geothermal policy, part of our whole policy in regard to all matters in Virgin, not because the Crown is putting acid on us, but because we realise that the vast resource is in the upper category. But you people have got to tell the government what you want. You need to sit there and take full medicine.
Fortunately, in New Zealand, we still have the courage to do that. I was talking to a good friend of mine in the energy scene in Germany. He said, doesn't matter what I do, Tony, they'll never listen to me. I said, well, there's one thing left in New Zealand. Anybody in New Zealand start telling the government what they should do, and they probably listen. So, you know, I have my say, so you do.
Right, another comment. Yes, gentleman at the back. Sam.
My question is to Ryan Fox, but my first comment to the chairman of the regional council is that have you ever tried to see a minister in Wellington? Have you ever tried to get a decision made in Wellington? We have spent 4 years trying to do that, and I guarantee we've never seen Ruth Richardson yet. My question to Brian Fox is, on one of the diagrams, he shows that geothermal fits into a 10 to 15 year time frame. He then went on to say, and I quote the treaty claims, to me, is that the excuse that he has for the 10 to 15 year time frame? I quote a case of Turapaki Trust. It's privately owned land. It's got no treaty claims. It's one of the, it's probably the biggest field in New Zealand. And it doesn't need to go through any plans. So what's holding things up? And my second question would be to Doug Heffernan. Again, power is too cheap. My question is, how do you arrive at it? After all, electrical makes 400 million a year. If it's too cheap, how do they make 400 million a year? Thank you,
I think the question of both reference to the too cheap is the same thing what I'm saying, is that relative to new generation, we can produce electricity from existing plant and from modifications to the existing plant to enhancements in energy efficiencies in the short term, which are putting back the need for any new generation. The corporation has created the equivalent of a brand new power station in the last 3 years, 200 megawatts, just by increasing the availability at Huntley and other stations, energy efficiencies, rerunning plant at Hydro at Takanu, etc. There's still a number of parts of the system where energy is not being fully utilised, and that is a lot cheaper than putting in a lot of new facilities. So in my view, this is my view, I mean, Alistair clearly disagrees with that because he's saying, look, we can do it now, and fine. And some, there will be, other developers will have different views, and as I've referred to Bay of Plenty, have gone ahead and done that. So, but from my perspective, and the market I'm aiming at, my market is quite different than what, say, Alistair may be going for. I'm a wholesaler, and I'm tending to sell into that wholesale pool, whereas if someone can create a product, as Doug has referred to in terms of long-term contracts, to direct to someone like Doug, then good. And that's where we will be all moving, all of us as well. So in that respect, I'm no different from Brian and Tuapaki and Alistair. And that's how I address it. I actually don't address myself as a developer being any different, but I have particular niche markets and I'm aiming at.
It doesn't answer my question, Mr. Chair. I asked why don't take 10 to 15 years time frame, and whether the treaty claim is fitted.
Well, I mean, I agree with you on Mopai, that's not an issue there. Although there is a question in terms of overall what might happen with the geothermal resources in general, and there could be some flow on there where you haven't put a claim in. But my list of issues that I believe have to be addressed are geothermal in general, not specific to any particular field.
Doug.
Respond to this. I mean, whenever you raise the issue of prices too cheap, you always bound to get some questions. I guess my first thing on, I don't intend to try and defend electrical, but yeah, I'd have to ask you, Sam, or Alistair, if I spread that 400 million profit, if that's the right number, across, I don't know, 10,000 megawatts of capacity, and converted that down to, I don't know, 20, 50 megawatts, you'd be bloody keen to get a hold of whatever that represents in terms of profit for your organisation. Why should they be any different? So I don't think it's a matter, I mean, 400 million sounds a lot of money, but when you're talking about 6.5 billion investment, you divide that down to, I don't know what your investment is, 50 million or something. 74. Okay? 74. He'll be looking for a 400 million or so return on that. If he's not, then he wouldn't have been persistent to the degree he had. All right? So you need to get those things in perspective for a start. The second thing is, what you're raising is, how do you handle socially the issue that to make a new investment in generation commercially sensible, how do you get the price for it up without the government subsidising? And I think all the responses I heard around Tony's questions before were based around someone making it pay. And in the past, and in the USA, it's either the government or a regulator that makes it pay. What we're trying to find in New Zealand is a way to make their users pay. And the real trick at the moment, I've just been involved in a study that's been run by Jim McLeod, is to find a way to make the new incremental capacity earn that higher price, but to not check up electrical profits beyond 1 million. Okay, so it's a matter of trying to get the commercial common sense to come through, but not have social disruption from the existing generating capacity. So there are ways you can do it. I guess the real test is going to be whether politically that whole message can be solved.
Ian Fan, Blackrock, Waiaki. My question is directed to Alistair. Alistair, I commiserate with you over the 9 million you spent today. Blackrock have also had some significant expenditure in that section. But I ask you to look back in hindsight now, would it not be more profitable all round for Geothermal to have an offer which Blackrock made at the Cargo County Council planning hearing on the project for Geothermal to utilise the separated waste water from the Waiaki field to generate the power using primary plant. This I see would have two benefits. The sustainable management of the Waiaki field would be enhanced. The more efficient use of the Waiaki field would be made. However, likely would have probably sold another 3 other plants by now.
Actually, this should be a question to Brian Fox and not to Alistair.
No, just to show that Blackrock not to competition and quite prepared for Alistair to enter and produce. So you have this power station operating using the separate water from the Waiaki field.
I know somebody else would take it.
The plant was doing up and running, it can be having a profit. I was very impressed this afternoon with after the integrated the plant at Grady Springs. After all approvals given, the plant was designed, built and operating for 1 year. And the investors were getting a return after 1 year. Surely that is the name of the game.
But again, just one comment to allow. This Waiaki wastewater is feeding into the 12-14 year time it was mentioned needed for power station.
Well, these are definitely, I don't want having to come to 7 times as a fund already. Okay, so the question he's asked was actually brought up by electrical council, my council, as a matter of competence. At the start of the appeal hearing on the water rights section. And it wasn't competence. I feel I can make you competence equally well. I will. The reason why we rejected the offer was it's going to cost about $30 to $40 million for the injection system required. We pumped the fluid about 6 kilometres into our neck of the woods, which is a production zone. At that time we didn't have, I showed you on the map, you may remember, an extra block of land we got that knocks along for the injection. We didn't have that land at the time. We now know. The opposition for electrical was not on so much on tape that if we re-injected, we would effectively quench the fires underneath us for the proving. So I leapfrogged back and bought more land so I could re-inject outside the zone. Contiguous boundaries, and it works. So period part was cost. Partly was the deposition of silicon equipment. By the time the fluid flowed 6 kilometres from electrical plus, we had gummed up pipes. And even then, I think the levels have been worked typically. By the time the temperature reached us, turning out the economic power plant. Well, I've got to say in response to this, that Jim Monica told me to be, and I was looking up to be like one day, I should be generating electricity at 2.2 cents a kilowatt. That's what I'm getting at. Electrical doesn't generate its new electricity anywhere near the avoiding cost of most years they have 4.5 cents. You look at its new generation cost over the last 7 or 8 years. Look at the cost of Huntly's generation cost. They only got away with it because they absorbed it inside the system. Well, I can't get my cost absorbed inside the system. So I got it after a discount. I think electrical themselves are looking at primary solar systems. I think it'll bring up a second. I'm trying to keep out of it.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Jim Lewis, a question to Brian Cox. That scenario shows geothermal electrical becoming economic new stations within 10 years or thereabouts. Presume that wasn't with the government persisting with its greenhouse gas reduction policy, so current state policy. I presume you looked at that scenario, and if so, how long ago should we have started looking at that?
We analyse and run a whole series of scenarios in terms of our decision making, and we do monitor what government might do in terms of carbon dioxide and a number of other issues. The chart I put out more as an amalgam of my feeling of where we're going. When I look at what all developers, not only ourselves, can do, and what the market really would want. Now, that's the big uncertainty on that is what is likely to come out of the new change that Doug was referring to. And so I haven't tried to take that into account. I've tended to stay with the current. So that's an amalgam of my view of how the industry is unfolding, where various types of plant will fit. A lot of there is work going on big hydro and big coal plant, but it's post-Maui era type stuff, and it's not in that middle category. The middle category is small hydro and the geothermal type situation, in my view.
Mr. Chairman, could I just make a comment? I had a discussion with the Minister for the Environment a few days ago, and this was triggered by a paper report from Electrical that they're considering seeding clouds in the Taupo region to use the solar energy to put into the hydro system. And I had a ratepayer ring me up and say, we've had enough bloody rain in Taupo this last year. And any silly so-and-so thinks you're going to seed clouds and use more rain, I don't know what you're going to do about it. So I thought, well now, the regional councillor is responsible for emissions to the atmosphere. And I said to the minister, how do you see that? He said, well, I'll come to you and get a consent because that will be silver iodide crystal, I think, is a preferred use, preferred system. He said that will be a emission to atmosphere, and they will be requiring a consent from the regional council. So.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you've found the last hour and a half very interesting and stimulating. We started off with Brian Cox giving us 7 reasons why geothermal not now, and I think probably fair to say that the prime reason amongst those was that he and Electrical see no need at present, and he referred to the fact in questions that new development and retrofitting of the existing stations, Electrical is pushing back the need for 200 megawatts. On the other hand, you've got Alistair and Brian Jones pushing to develop as private developers, and Alistair, after significant battles, is well down the track. And then you've got Doug apparently keen for his body to use energy generated from other than the state. He made the point that there's been a lot of talk and a lot of planning over the years, but as yet there's still no actual development. He made the point that really developers have got to start at the market end, and that there's really no point in going through the regulatory process if you haven't got an end purchaser. He told us of the commercial reality, some of the issues facing the industry, such as royalties. And then you had Murray pointing out to us that in terms of new development, one of the difficulties we all face is the new legislation, the Resource Management Act, and just how regulatory agencies and planning tribunals are going to interpret that legislation. And coming back to the commercial realities, I somehow get the feeling that somebody like me as an end user if I understand Doug correctly, may have to accept higher power prices for this development to occur, but the benefit of that may be more rational decision making, which ultimately benefits all of us. So I thank you very much, gentlemen, and would ask the audience to thank our speakers in the appropriate manner.
Well, if you don't know him, I can read about him in the little green book that you get from your workshop proceedings. Anyway, he is sitting in seat table hierarchy, seat number 1, and that is the best table. His eyes will be popping out during the real show. Right now we have got a mouth-watering show. And first I'd like to invite Professor Pat Brown to say a few words. Pat.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Derek has been very worried since he found out that I was going to make a presentation to him this evening. In fact, he threatened at one stage not to come. Well, if you needn't to worry, there's two things going for him. Firstly, Tony Mann isn't talking tonight. And secondly, I'm not going to mention the girl in the red bikini. In fact, to be strictly correct, it was a woman in a red bikini. Anyway, you all have browsed through the workshop proceedings in the last couple of days, and you will have read the item about Derek's retirement there. You will have been interested in what he's done. You will also have been appalled, like I was, that he's not wearing a tie in this photograph. You will also have noticed that he is a member of a large number of clubs. He's had a whole series of achievements that are enormous in length, but I was really surprised and deeply hurt that his major achievement was not mentioned in that blurb, and that he is a member, in fact he's a foundation member, of the Old Boars Club. Now the Old Boars Club is a club that the staff of the Geothermal Institute belong to, so it's about as elite as the Royal Society or as being a companion of honour. So that wasn't mentioned. So what happens when an old boar gets taken off the line? Well, what we expect and hope is that Derek will be available for peak load when we find that the revolutions of the Geothermal Institute are coming under stress. So we hope that he will be available for peak load. Incidentally, the Old Boars Club, I'm sure many of you will agree, is appropriately named, and I'm sure all the geothermal diploma students will agree that it is entirely appropriately named. So Derek is going off stream. We'll greatly miss Derek. We'll miss his enthusiasms. One of his enthusiasms, by the way, is related to pipes. When he was working in Britain, he worked on square pipes. And these square pipes included the ducts for the aeroplane, the Concorde. If you look at the Concorde air ducts, it's got square ducts to it. And that's due to Derek. Now, when he came to New Zealand to learn how rugby was played, or to watch how rugby was played, he found that the pipes in this country are mostly round. In fact, the pipes that are associated with geothermal systems are all, in fact, round. So he's been enthusiastic about pipes for the last, well, ever since I've known him anyway. We'll certainly miss his enthusiasms, or some of his strange enthusiasm within the Geothermal Institute. Now, we don't count the woman in the red bikini as a strange enthusiasm, because that's entirely understandable. But we'll certainly miss many of the other enthusiasms. Now, we've got used, although we miss Derek, we've got used to him in some sense and not being with us, because he is a great traveller. Now, last century there was a traveller called Anthony Trollope, a novelist, a Victorian novelist, who wrote a book called The Tireless Traveller. And we have a tireless traveller of the 20th century here in Derek. Now, he usually manages to be away at a critical time, like the student project, and he also usually manages to be away in his trips. He usually manages to go through Bali. I'm not sure why. I went with him once on a trip and we went through Bali, and I'm not sure why he likes to go there. In fact, he's the only guy I know who could, if he had to go to the Chatham Islands from Auckland, would somehow manage to route himself through Bali. Anyway, Derek will certainly miss you. We've got a trophy here. Which we'll give you, but just before I do it, there's one story, Derek. I promised my story about Red Bikini, but well, in the early years of the Geothermal Institute, when we all used to go down to Wairaki, we used to go down in March, and it's, believe it or not, sometimes hot in Taupo in March. And about 10, 12 years ago, it was certainly, we had a hot day, we'd been out with the students, it had been a long day, and we, Manfred and Derek and I decided that we deserved a beer. So we went into the public bar of the Wairaki Hotel, and one of us, either Manfred or I, ordered 1 jug and 3 small glasses. Actually, it was probably Manfred given that. Anyway, we ordered these drinks, and we were standing up there at the bar there having the beers. Brown's beers, Brown being very thirsty, 2 gulps and his beer was gone. Manfred, a bit more sedate, took it a bit more slowly. Derek has a very small sip from his beer and then talks about pipes for 5 minutes. Another very small sip, more talks about pipes. Brown with his tongue hanging out, and even Manfred was looking thirsty at that stage. Finally, after what seemed an interminable time, Derek finally finishes his beer. He plonks down his glass and with a very satisfied tone to his voice said, "Never touch the sides." That really confirms his legendary drinking prowess. Anyway, Derek, we'll certainly miss you. We wish you all the best. I've got a trophy here which I'll ask you to come up. I'll just explain what it is firstly. We decided we were looking at putting a pipe on this trophy, but we probably have criticised, not probably, definitely have criticised our design. So what we have here is a turbine blade. Now it's a very special turbine blade. It's from the generator or a generator at the Wairaki power station. So if one of your generators, Ian, is running a bit wonky down at Wairaki, this might be at least a partial explanation. If you do know about it, maybe this explains why the security getting into Wairaki is so difficult now. But anyway, on behalf of us all, that is KC and Manfred and Mary and Oscar and Supri and Stuart and Ashley and of course Robert McKibben, because once you're an old boy you never lose that status, Robert, and myself, we'd ask you to come up and accept this item or trophy that recognises your contributions to the staff of the Geothermal Institute, and we wish you all the best.
Oh no! You're not saying anything tonight. I have got 9 more on my list. Oh, the next one is coming all the way from the dark continent of, what do I call it? I don't know anyway. But you can see the real him coming up in a minute. Dr. James Kanoa from Kenya, please. James is a founding student of the Geothermal Institute. He will speak on behalf of all the Geothermal students.
I wrote a speech which Casey told me not to read because Casey did not want me to say about Derek. When I arrived in Auckland in 1979, I expected to come to the University of Auckland, but Derek and the brothers took us to a pie carton. That was our introduction. And after that, the following day, they took us to the Kiwi Tavern. So most of my time in Auckland, we spent in the Kiwi Tavern, accompanied by the staff of the Geothermal Institute. And every Friday, they would come there to check on our workshop and our progress. As you can see, some of us turned out all right. And I'm talking about KC, not about me. When I left Nairobi last week, friends of mine were asking me whether it was worth the trouble of traveling 3 days. It takes 3 days to travel from Nairobi to Auckland to come to a party. And I told them I thought it was worth it because, one, I wanted to see whether the Kiwi was still there, and two, it would be great to see Derek because I didn't believe he was retiring. Now I understand he is partly retiring. Not so much because he's fed up with teaching, but because he also spent a little bit more time playing with his boat. I don't know what everyone thinks of that. There won't be much difference at home. Now, I was told by Casey to say a few nice things about Derek. Now, one of the nice things I can say about Derek is, and this is serious, I was very surprised at how much, because moving from 2% team all over the world like we used to. Thank you. I couldn't get all my classmates together to buy you presents, but I passed through the duty-free shop. Singapore Airport, I brought you something made in Scotland.
Before I ask the next person up, Stephen Drew, but I want to remind people that you can take your video and camera now. This is for their show, but not during the real show at 9 o'clock. Okay? This is serious business. Please don't take any cameras or pictures during the real show, starting at 9 o'clock. Right, Stephen Drew, please.
Pleasure to be back in the geothermal community. I couldn't resist an invitation to come and farewell Derek tonight. I wanted to set straight a certain record because we've built up over the years a reputation in New Zealand of fishing together and not being particularly good fishermen. It all started over 10 years ago when we started plotting how we were going to actually catch this, if we get the right pocket, this magical trout. Here we go. And this was our dream, to catch the rainbow, the biggest rainbow in New Zealand. So when I got posted to Rotorua, guess who was knocking on my door the first weekend? And so we went fishing, and we spent all weekend fishing. We trudged the streams, the big rivers and the lakes, and did we catch anything? Did we catch anything? No. But I've come to put the record straight. Derek's fish. Your fish. I have something in here to hopefully take through to your retirement. But while I'm on stage, what I'd like to do on behalf of the geothermal engineering community is not only to thank Derek for his encouragement and commitment to geothermal engineering in New Zealand over the years, but to wish him all the best and hope he has a happy retirement. So Derek, thank you very much for all the help and for putting New Zealand on the map as far as geothermal engineering is concerned.
Okay, well, The next one is coming from ECNZ Geothermal Workshop, Mr. Ian Tain. Please.
None of your stories.
Another 5.
Switched on. Derek trembling in huge one.
Don't forget the punchline.
Well, I've known Derek for quite a number of years. We did a lot of work in the early 1980s on corrosion problems, which we're hearing about today at the conference. But all my experience with Derek, he's always been that calm, cool, collected. Nothing seems to ruffle him. I've seen occasionally once he loses the students at somewhere about the steam field at Wairaki, he seems to get a little bit annoyed, but nothing out of the ordinary. But I did see him once, and Patrick, it's a traveller's tale. And Derek and I were travelling to the inaugural meeting of the International Geothermal Association in Largarello in Italy. Now, the meeting was on Tuesday, and so Derek and I were flying out from Auckland on the Friday night. We both had friends around the London area. We were going to spend the weekend with those friends in London before travelling on together on the same flight to Largarello. So I turned up at the airport Friday night. My plane is the Air New Zealand one, and the Institute are great at getting those cheapo fares. And they had booked them on a continental flight. Because I left with Air New Zealand, a marvellous flight through, arrived at Gatwick Airport half an hour early, met with my friends, had a magnificent weekend down in Bournemouth, drove up to Heathrow in plenty of time on the Tuesday morning. I booked in, and I said, oh, by the way, is Professor Freestone, has he checked in yet? And yes, he has. He's just checked in about 10 minutes before you. So I thought, I'll go and have a see where Derek is. So checked in, went through the departure lounge, and there I see him. And no kidding, he was an absolute wreck. His hair was standing up at end, his shirt was all crumpled, his trousers were all crumpled, and he was clutching his briefcase in his hands, and he was staring that bleary-eyed look out at him, just in a complete daze. Of course, my opening remark to him, that really set him off. I said, hello Derek, have you had a great time this weekend? And steam, we talk about geothermal board and the steam. Steam was actually coming out of Derek's ears. And the number of 4-letter words that came out, I didn't know half of them existed. Time, he said, I've only arrived in this blank blank country 10 blank 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 minutes ago. I've been all the time travelling to get here from New Zealand. So here's Derek's tale, traveller's tale of woe, is a classic. He arrives at Auckland Airport to be told, oh, your plane will be an hour delayed. And then he waits, the hour passes, another announcement, your plane will be delayed a further 3 hours. We have got some mechanical problem, but we are hopeful to fix it. After 7 hours of this, they finally cancelled the plane and told Derek, well, we'll put you into a local airport hotel, and so we can get you rescheduled on the next flight. Well, Derek said, well, can't I go home? No, we live in Auckland. Oh, no, you can't go home. You've got to stay in the hotel so that we can get that fairly quickly in case there's a seat comes up. So I'm not sure if it's 3 or 4 hours Derek spends in the airport hotel, and finally gets the call. Yes, we've got you a flight, Professor Freestone. Derek says, good. Does it get me into Gatwick or Heathrow? Well, not quite, sir. We've only got you scheduled as far as Honolulu at this time.
But look, for sure, once you get to Honolulu, there'll be no problems. I'm sure you'll get a flight there straight to Gatwick or Heathrow very quickly. Eric arrives at Honolulu. Check up, you got me rescheduled for a flight on to London? No sir, we're having a slight problem here. But what we've done, we've checked you into one of the local hotels. Now, don't take your luggage, we'll look after your luggage and we'll see it gets onto your flight. We expect you'll be there about 3 hours and then we'll have you rescheduled. So yeah, off he goes to the hotel. After 5 hours, he decides to phone and find out what's going on. When he phones, they say, what are you doing here? You should have been on a flight that left 2 hours ago. Your luggage is already on the way to Gatwick. Anyway, you'd better come in and we'll try and get you rescheduled. So I'm not sure if it was San Francisco you ended up in the next hotel, but but again, into San Francisco and checked into another hotel. And eventually I think you got a flight out, was it to JFK Kennedy in New York. And finally you arrived in London on the Tuesday morning, about half an hour before I turned up to meet you. Well, that's not the end of the tale. His luggage had ended up in Gatwick, and he was at Heathrow. And he said, well, can you get the luggage over in time to catch the flight to Italy? Oh, we'll do our best, sir, but it's the morning rush hour, and we're not so sure we're going to be able to do that. So Derek said, oh, look after my briefcase. He's clutching this briefcase to his chest all the time. And I'll go and buy myself some clean underwear and a shirt. And that was the second time I saw Derek actually steam coming out. Because has anyone ever tried to buy a shirt in Heathrow Airport? And the cost is almost as bad, Mike, as that beer I bought in you in Iceland. I think it was close to about £42 you had to pay for this shirt in Heathrow Airport. But anyway, Derek, after you got over that, I'm glad to say we had a good flight out to Italy. And I think it was after about 3 days his luggage finally turned up in Larderello. And so Patrick, there's a tale for you, for Derek, and he's travelling. And after that, I'm surprised he ever wanted to go travelling again, even to Bali.
Let's get away from that.
Anyway, Derek, on behalf of your friends and colleagues from Wairaki, from the Electricity Corporation, I've got a small present here to present to you. And brings back London did do a very good job with the wrapping, Trevor. Well, that's all I've got to say. Go to you.
Thank you, Jan. Oh no, the fish is not ready yet. It needs a bit more grilling. 4 down, 6 to go. In fact, I also got an Oregon fish story to tell after everybody has a chance. Speaking on behalf of Works, Wairaki Geothermal, Brandon Berry, please. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to be here tonight on behalf of Works Geothermal just to say a couple of words Derek on the occasion of this retirement. I was going to tell a story, but I think I'll dispense with it. Everybody else has got some fairly interesting stories about Derek, and I could try out one or two, but I won't. The one thing I would say to Derek, I'll dispense with the story. I'll give him a warning instead. When old bores are taken offline, Derek, they're normally grouted up. Worse than that, once they grout it up, they cut off your wellhead. I guess I've had an association with Derek in two ways. Firstly, through Works Geothermal, and Works Geothermal's involvement with the diploma course, and secondly as a 1980 student. And I'd like to endorse James Kinua's comment about the Kiwi and how the Geothermal Institute staff used to lead us astray over there when we were at the Institute. I don't want to say too much more, Derek. I wish you the very best in your retirement from all of us at Wairaki. And I've got a little something here I'd like to give to you. Thank you. Watch it if I pop up. He can look at himself now, that's good. Well, we're halfway there. Well, Design Power is next, and Duncan Brown will speak on behalf of Design Power website.
Derek.
I'd first of all like to thank KC for us to follow on from speakers who produce fish. Talking about using their baggage, and I'm just glad the fish wasn't in the baggage. My first memories of you, Derek, were when you came down to Wairaki in the late 70s. Yes, with the first group of students from the Institute, showed them around the place. And then my memories carry on with you and KC working on Wairaki 207. My fondest memories of you are floating in a swimming pool in Bandung on the way to Bali. I'd like to thank you for all your assistance to the geothermal community in New Zealand over the years. We expect to see you around for many years to come, helping us. Close to my mouth. Helping us out into the future. I'd like to wish you on behalf of Design Power a good retirement, and we'll see you next year. Thank you.
Well, Genzo is next, and speaking on behalf of Genzo is Mr. Hagen Ho. He has got a lot of stories to tell about bore 207. That is a magic number.
Thank you, Casey. And first of all, Derek, I'd like to offer Tony's apologies because in fact Tony was originally scheduled to speak about Derek tonight, and I'm sure his stories and renditions of what Derek has been up to over the past years would probably be far more interesting than mine. As Casey has indicated, and you may have read in the valedictory note in the proceedings, Derek and a few of us early students in geothermal got involved well, got involved in geothermal in the mid-70s. I was very fortunate to be lectured by Derek through my early engineering school years, and then after that, for some time, in the Institute, well, before the Institute was formed, along with Casey Lee. One of the things I think we'll always remember Derek for is being always a very warm, understanding person, somebody who we could always rely on to lead us to understand things, rather than simply being lectured at. And I believe one of the things that really exemplifies this would be the experiences that Casey and I had down at Wairaki whilst we were testing fluids flowing through pipes for Derek. And in fact, the story I'd like to tell is not about the fluids flowing through the pipes. But Casey and I would often travel down to Wairaki for periods of 10 days maybe to test fluids flowing through pipes, and we would periodically be visited by Derek. We would go out to the site, and Derek would instruct us to spend as little time on the site as is possible so we could get away somewhere else and carry out some of the endeavours, the extra endeavours that Derek is perhaps not so well known for, although some of the fish stories may be his. Derek used to take Casey and I on exercises to increase our experiences and broaden our understanding of the world around us. He used to go on what we would term environmental excursions, usually to one of the very good trout fishing rivers nearby. Now, of course, this was not trout fishing. Derek had invented this ingenious system where he was going to test the flow of the river. For this, he had invented a probe, a small piece of metal with sharpened end, with an appropriate bend in it, and maybe a bit of a bar. A device attached to it to produce a little bit of drag, and we would attach this probe with a long line. Derek then taught Casey and I that we had to cast this device across the river and gradually drag this in, and with very, very sensitive touch and feeling, we would be able to gauge the flow of the stream. Now, of course, there were lots of hazards, and the literature that was written about this technique indicated that perhaps one of the minor hazards, that the probe would tend often, as one was trying to cast it across the stream, would get caught in the bushes behind you. We would lose many of our little probes that way. On the other hand, perhaps the major hazard that we would come across was lurking in these streams used to be somewhat large rainbow trout, and sometimes the old brown trout. These trout used to have a habit of perhaps nibbling at the probe, and in some instances they'd actually bite it. That's destroying the probe, or perhaps in the worst case, the fish would somehow become snared on the probe. And then you'd have the laborious task of having to haul the darn thing in, disconnect this unfortunate creature, throw it away, and so you could carry on trying to actually gauge the flow of the stream. Anyway, perhaps that's not the most memorable part of this environmental excursions that we used to go on. In fact, Derek used to take us and show us that, in fact, not only, well, whilst you were gauging the flow of the stream in this manner, it was also possible to sample the fluids that were flowing down the river. And Derek had developed this ingenious method of catching fluid samples. Derek's fluid sample system basically involved Derek hopping into what was, or what could be described as a large pair or oversized pair of boots. These boots had attached to them a rubberized kind of a shroud, and this was kind of strapped over the shoulders with a couple of straps. Actually, when I think about it, it's remarkably similar to a pair of endless waders. Anyway, whilst Derek was out there in the middle of the stream, very sensitively dragging this probe across the river, Derek was also able, with great dexterity and fine control, to be able to maneuver his feet to find a nice large slippery rock. Remember, this is below the rippled surface of the river, with the river flowing by. Derek's foot would unerringly find the slippery rock, and he would then gently transfer his weight, little by little, onto the slippery rock. Until suddenly, frictional forces between the boot and the rock were overcome, gravity took over, Derek descended, and later Derek ascended, having managed to capture a large sample of the river water. Now, even though with Derek's wonderful capabilities as a teacher, Casey and I would repeatedly try to emulate his marvellous feat with no success. And yet, Derek, repeatedly, we would do the same exercise, and without fail, Derek could master it with ease. Derek, the years that we've worked together have been memorable, and I know all of us are going to miss you and your presence from the Geothermal Institute. However, I'm sure that we're all going to look forward to seeing you still within the geothermal community. And those of us from Gainesville especially wish you all the best, and we look forward to working with you again in the years to come. Thank you, Derek.
There are many stories to be told about 207. One of them is, just to finish off, normally he expected us to collect good quality data from the two-phase flow. And sometimes he would arrive unannounced and then ask, "Where were you at lunchtime?" And that means we were not at the bore collecting the good quality data he expected. Anyway, Hillel Legman would like to speak a few words on behalf of all turbines.
Good evening. You know, I'm coming from Israel, and we the Israelis believe that believe God is sitting in our vicinity. So let me tell you the last gossip coming from Jerusalem. In last week audience, the Lord is sitting in the seat. Shall I repeat? Yes. Let me tell you the last gossip coming from the vicinity of Jerusalem. The Lord is sitting on his chair, giving an audience, and last week President Bush is coming in. Oh Lord, I have a big problem. Would it be possible that I will have a second chance? Well, the Lord is checking the pools and the calls, advisors, getting, dear son George, not in your lifetime. President Prime Minister Taylor is coming in. Oh Lord, I have a big problem with these miners. Would it be possible in my lifetime to fix this economical problem? God is telling him, not in your lifetime, son. Young Derek is popping in. Oh Lord, will it be possible for me to forget all this geothermal business and find nice time for me to retire and enjoy the life and enjoy the water and the fish? Not in my lifetime. That was the last gossip. Derek, thank you very much. We are a very small community of geothermal people in Israel. Thank you very much for your help to do a little bit more action than activity in this country. And I had the intention to bring with me an olive tree, so takes 3 days to come from Jerusalem to Auckland, so I bought a small piece of that. Let me check if it's not made in Hong Kong. Made in Israel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jiman. We got 2 more to go. Next one is from KRTA, Norman Firth. Please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I stand here to speak on my own behalf and also those of my colleagues at KRTA. I have one very fond memory about Derek. It relates to the almost routine procedure that he used to adopt and still does at the Geothermal Workshop. At the end of the first session, he creeps in from the sides, presents himself to the audience, and proceeds to describe the administrative details that shall take place for the rest of the workshop. I recall this happening perhaps 2 or 3 years ago, and Derek came on and with his usual aplomb proceeded to describe what the arrangements for the day were going to be. When he had finished, a gentleman from the audience, I can't remember who it was now, I have an idea it was somebody from Works Corp, got to his feet and said, "Professor Preston, I have a very important question to ask you, and I want you to pay very special attention to this." Derek stood there silent for once, and the gentleman said, "Is there curry for lunch again?" It's the only time I've ever known Derek be lost for words. But if I could be serious for a moment, I've always been fascinated really by the very special nature of the geothermal industry. Here we have an industry which is a true integration of engineers and scientists and even those who tread the hallowed halls of academia, amongst which we can count our good professor. Special industries of this kind tend to produce special characters, and I think we would all agree that Derek Preston is one of those. Here is a man of warmth and understanding, of integrity and great technical ability and compassion and good humour. And with those characteristics, I think he has made the Geothermal Institute a very special place of learning, especially for those students who have had the privilege of sitting at his feet, so to speak. And Derek, on behalf of KRTA and all who have worked for the company in the geothermal area over the years, I'd like to express our appreciation of your contribution to the Geothermal Institute and to the geothermal industry. Now, back in 1974, one of your students, and this was, I should say, at a time when Derek was in a formal life, before he joined the Geothermal Institute, one of your students named Phil Laurie was sitting at your feet, being bored blind in one of Derek's thermodynamics lectures. I have a feeling from what Phil was saying that Derek Friesen was being bored blind by Derek Friesen's lecture of thermodynamics too. Phil later joined KRTA and ended up in the Philippines doing design work on the Tonganoan 1 geothermal steam field. And he ran into a problem related to condensate in very long steam lines, and in desperation sought the advice of his former mentor through the research work that Derek had done on the design of condensate pots, and managed to solve this particular problem with the help of Derek's earlier work. I rather suspect that the success that Phil had in solving those design problems resulted in his present elevated position with KRTA as a director. Phil, at the moment, of course, is working again on the problems of steam field design at Darajat. And he's run into another problem. And as a memento of KRTA's association with Professor Friesen, we'd like to present Derek with another problem to solve. So if Derek would just come forward, I'll explain what I would like done. We have here a small model of a, you may not see it very well, it's a modified steam condensate drain pipe pot. It has a small flange on the top which enables the device to be attached to and removed very freely from the underside of a steam line. It has a small hole in the bottom and then a tube out the side into which compressed air can be applied. That's the first part of the problem, and I'll give that to Derek now. The second part of the problem is a small sample of condensate from the Darajat field. It has all the appearances of a detergent-like liquid from my observations, but I'm assured that it is in fact a sample of Darajat steam condensate. And I'll give that to Derek now. We'd like Derek to address himself to the problem of what happens when the condensate is placed within this pot and compressed air is applied to the tube at the end, and bring us down a report before the end of the workshop, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you very much.
He's desperate now, he wants to say something. Oh, before, excuse me. By now you should have a sheet in front of you with many words. And it's actually a song composed by Mary. But before I let Mary come up here and teach you how to sing that song, I have got something to read to you. He says, top secret, not for Derek's eyes. This is actually a fax from America. And as we know, it's very hard to keep the fax machine from Derek because he always goes there. Anyway, I think we managed that. I better read it exact words. Derek, how many Oregon fish stories? Fish again. Have you told about our infamous outing on the Amquat? Well, I'm not too sure where that is, but that's alright. Colin has yet to perfect the house stuff. I don't know what's that either. Perhaps another on-site in-service would be helpful. Best wishes for a happy retirement, Paul and Colin Linau from Oregon Geoheat Center. I got 3 more. Even though you are far too young for retirement, I am sure you will make a go of it. Best of luck, Kevin Rafferty. Next one, from John and Eva Lan, Professor John and Eva Lan from Geoheat Center also. I assume by retiring, you will be able to charge more as a consultant when you teach at the Geothermal Institute. Good luck, and we hope to see you sometime. Last one. Wishing you nothing but blue skies and sunny days. Happy retirement and best wishes. Geoheat Center staff. And then I got a PS at the bottom. Jean is elk hunting. I will give you the facts to you later there. Right now, I'd like to invite Mary to come up here to teach you to sing the song.
Thank you, Casey. I don't think I need to teach you this. I think all of you know it from all the times that Derek has performed it as his party piece at all the geothermal social functions we've had so far. What I would ask you to do is, when your name comes up on the verse, could you gather over by where Stuart is, by the stairs there, and then we'll get you all together at the end of the thing. Derek will be remembered from his rendition of this One Man Went to Mow with his dog Spot, but here we have a number of his students mentioned, and I'm sure you all know the tune. I thought you just needed to work up an appetite before dinner, so let's get going on it. Hope it's a key everyone can sing. You know the tune, one man went to mow, meadow, like that. So, okay, let's go. One man came to work in God's own. One man and his wife in lawn came to work in God's own. 2 men went to work on 2 days. Derek and his student Mike Allen went to work on 2 days. 3 men went to work on separators. Derek and his student James went to work on separators. 4 men went to work on doublets. Derek and his student Pam went to work on doublets. 5 men went to work on 2 bays. Derek and his students went to work on 2 bays. 6 men went to work on networks. Derek and his students went to work on networks. 7 men went to work on the geysers. Derek and his student May went to work on geysers. 8 men went to work on Tianjin. Derek and his student Jen went to work on Tianjin. 9 men went to work on PhDs. Derek and his student Marcos went to work on PhDs. 10 men went to work on WHEs. Derek and his student Joko went to work on WHEs. 11 men went to work on well bores. Derek and his student Callum went to work on well bores. 12 men went to work on DHEs. Derek and his student Mike Dunstall on downhole heat exchangers. Are they all there? Derek, please could you join them, and then we'll get a picture. And any other the students that we just didn't have enough verses for, we'd like to join that group that Derek can keep as a nice memento tonight. Thank you, Ashley. He's going to do the honours for us. And I hope that worked up your appetite in terms of dinner. Thanks very much for your help. Thank you very much.
Derek might like to say something.
Another one.
Come on, Casey.
Come on, Spot. Yeah, good.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Put it close to your mouth.
I'm not going to say much because dinner's about ready and I'm sure you're all hungry as I am. Just to say thank you very much for all those tributes, which I don't deserve, I'm sure. I'm reminded when I look at the proceedings that there's a couple of other guys that are retiring this year or have retired. Unfortunately, neither of them are with us, but I would particularly like to pay tribute to one guy who I've known for a number of years and who is, in my mind, one of the pioneers in the industry, and that of course is Keith Wilson. Keith joined, as we know, Wairaki in 1959, and I was talking to him today because a number of us have been thinking about the idea of trying to put together a book on Wairaki, or at least try to record the early history. At the Institute we have some old papers, and Keith came up with some old pictures and some further papers, and I was reminded that Keith in fact has been there since '59. So I'd particularly like to pay tribute to his contribution at this time. I think we should forget it. And Harry Rayner, of course, also, as is detailed in the proceedings, he's also reached that glorious age of retirement. I did, in fact, have quite a lot of things I was going to say, but I'm not going to do that. You'll be glad to hear. But there's a couple of things I would like to say. Pat Brown warned me that he was going to try to embarrass me, and I think he succeeded. But I would like to get my own back a little bit, in the sense that Pat always seeks the limelight. I don't know whether you've seen our brochure. On the first page of the brochure, there's a picture of Pat. He's always there. If he wants to get in the forefront, then Pat will be there, and there's a photograph will be taken. The other thing was that Pat's our rock man, rock in inverted commas. He calls himself a geologist, but the rest of us is a rock man. And on one of my recent travels, and I hesitate to say it was a work trip, not a holiday, I came back with a bit of rock. And I presented it to him one day in the office, and at that time, that was the last we saw of it. I suspect he's taken thin sections of it, but the rock was in fact from Blackpool, and it had the Blackpool rock as the core. And I'm waiting to see when he comes back and tells me whether he's found any zeolites, is that right? Or any of fluid inclusions in this bit of rock. James, I have a lot of respect for. James has been with us on 2 occasions, first as one of the early students, and several stories I can tell about James. But one of the things is, you notice how round he is? When Ashley came to me and asked me, how do we describe James, we said, well, you look for a guy with a fuzzy hair and round. James has a reputation. No, I won't say anything about his reputation. But the other thing was that when he was in New Zealand, he always, we were continually worried about when he was going to get married. There seemed to be 1 or 2 ladies hanging around him from time to time. And when I met him the other day, I asked him if he's married. And he said, No, he says, nobody's asked me. I should have said also, of course, that he was one of my PhD students. My very first PhD student was Mike Allen, and I inherited Mike, if that's the right word. He was being supervised by an American colleague who returned home to the States, and I inherited him and followed him through his PhD. And he was my first one at Auckland, and I must say he taught me a lot about supervision of graduate students. And one of the real critical things he taught me was that you never let a student out of the place until he has written his thesis. Mike disappeared before he'd finished his thesis, before he'd written it up, and it was about 2.5 years later that we actually got it out of him. He actually joined Gensel at that time, went to Indonesia, and he popped home for holidays, and that was all we saw of him. Nevertheless, I have appreciated being associated with Mike over the years, and I say I learned a lot from him. The other guy that I'd like to mention, since he's here tonight, that's the newest one. Mike was the oldest one, James was somewhere in between, and Mike Dunstall over here, he's been the last one. In fact, he just got his PhD as of last week, or at least he got through his oral. Mike would recognise some of those names on Telegram because he spent a few months in Klamath Falls working with the Geo Heat Centre people. But one thing I would like to read about Mike, he has had 1 or 2 publications, and this is one of his lesser known publications. It's entitled Completing a PhD, A Change for Good, and how it feels to submit a thesis. It says, submission of your thesis is actually a huge anticlimax. You'd think after 4.5 years of hard work, actually more like 3.5 years of postgraduate life and 1 year of hard work, that submission will mark the beginning of a new era, maybe even a new age. Unfortunately, no one really notices except those incoming students who want your desk next to the window. The only new things in your life is that you actually have to stay at work when you don't want to, and you don't work for yourself anymore. But there are pluses. You can sleep, that's a nice change, and you can afford to eat again. Not just Wheat Bix either, but real food, like meat for those non-vegetarians and cashew nuts for the rest. That's because for the first time in your life, or at least since as long as you can remember, you get paid. You suddenly realise that somebody out there will actually pay you to do things that are often either easier than all that stuff you did for free in your PhD. A word of caution, however. Just because you get paid doesn't mean you are rich, even if it seems like it. Too late for me though, I've already bought a new car. I can assure you that felt better than submitting the thesis. Mike's new car is in fact a 5-litre Commodore. He has an inkling for fast, big cars and also little motorbikes which he drives through the forest. And some of his stories of driving through the forest on the motorbike are quite horrendous. The other thing is that he only drinks water or beer. And Ian, as he recollected earlier this evening, knows something about that because when we were in Iceland recently, Ian went to buy Mike a beer, taking pity on him, and he'd ordered 2 beers. But being the Scotsman as he is, when he found that it was $18 a can, he only had 1 beer. Anyway, thank you for all your kind words. I've appreciated all the many friends that I've made. I don't feel that I've lost any yet. I hope I never do. Being a member of the geothermal community is one of the great things of life that I particularly enjoy. Thank you very much.